Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into, one of the most complex and volatile topics in the new millennium, the
Sure.
role of religion in our world today. It's just so dramatic and often contradictory.
It really is. And our mission today is pretty clear. We're looking at a whole range of sources that basically show two realities existing at the same time. On one hand, you have these deep historical conflicts, and on the other, a really profound, organized global movement pushing for tolerance.
That tension is absolutely central. It's what this whole deep dive is about, really. The sources just lay it out. Centuries of struggle, the wars between Catholics and Protestants in Europe, the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
But then, almost in the next breath, they pivot to this powerful interfaith movement that's really taken hold over the last few decades, all about dialogue and respect.
And we need to understand both sides of that coin, what's driving the conflict and what's driving the cooperation. So we're going to distill the key players, the different ways of thinking, and the solutions that are defining faith today. The goal here is to give you a quick, but really comprehensive understanding of where things stand.
Let's start with the challenge then. It's funny, despite all our tech and progress, the world is seeing this huge renewal of religious influence. And that often leads to political action and, well, sometimes violence.
Right.
So we have to get our terms straight. What's the real difference between fundamentalism and religious extremism? They get used interchangeably all the time.
And that distinction is just vital because they are not the same thing. Fundamentalism at its core is about doctrinal preservation.
Doctrinal preservation. So, like protecting the original text.
Exactly. Fundamentalists are believers who strictly hold to the traditional teachings and practices of their faith. Their main goal is usually internal. They want to preserve what they see as the purity of their faith, to stop it from being compromised or, diluted by modern life.
Okay, so fundamentalism is about holding the line, sticking to the rules. How does that how does that morph into something more dangerous, into extremism?
Extremism is where the belief system takes a political and often violent turn. Religious extremism is the belief in and the pushing of extreme religious opinions, views that go way, way beyond just the fundamentals.
Okay.
And here's the crucial part. Extremists are prepared to take violent action to defend those views. And, most importantly, they're willing to use the power of the state, political authority, to force their beliefs on everyone else.
So that's the line. Using political power to enforce a radical interpretation.
That is the absolute critical line. And the sources, they give us a really chilling example. The Taliban in Afghanistan. Their actions are a textbook case of religious extremism, especially their destruction of the 1,500-year-old Buddha statues in Bamiyan.
Right. And why is that specific act such a perfect illustration? Beyond just being a terrible act of destruction, why extremism and not just a very strict religious view against idols?
Because it connects directly to that political dynamic we just mentioned.
Yeah.
The Taliban were acting as the state authority. They enforced a very specific, very radical interpretation of a concept called shirk, or idolatry. Now, most fundamentalist groups would say, don't create new idols. But to systematically destroy ancient cultural heritage that wasn't even being actively worshipped, that shows the state believed it had the political and the theological mandate to wipe out any visual trace of a competing faith. It's an act of total political enforcement.
That is just a horrific example of what that kind of thinking can lead to. But now we have to turn to the other side. This is the great paradox, right? While conflict and destruction get all the headlines, our sources reveal this incredible unity across different faiths when it comes to ethics.
It's the profound counterpoint, isn't it? You have these massive cultural and theological divides. Different gods, different histories, different rituals. And yet somehow the world's major religions all arrive at a nearly identical moral core. It's this common thread. Some people call it the golden rule.
Yeah, the sacred secret running through human history. It's amazing. It kind of sets aside all the differences in belief and just focuses on how we should treat each other. The consistency is just striking.
Let's actually look at some examples from the sources just to see how universal this really is.
Okay, so take Christianity. It's a positive command. In everything, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Very direct.
Right. Now contrast that with Confucianism, which frames it as a negative prohibition. It says, do not do unto others what you would not have done unto yourself. So the phrasing is different, positive versus negative. But the outcome, this idea of mutual respect and not harming people, it's identical.
And you see it mirrored almost word for word in Buddhism. Hurt not others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful. Then Sikhism has this wonderfully expansive version. No one is a stranger to me. No one is an enemy. Indeed, I am a friend to all.
I love that one. And even where the context is more specific, the core idea is still there. Taoism applies it to community life, to commerce even. Regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain. Regard your neighbor's loss as your own loss. It's demanding that empathy gets extended into every single part of life.
Okay, so here's the analytical challenge then. If this ethic of non-harm is so universal, why is there so much conflict? I mean, how do faith communities square this inclusive ethical core with their unique doctrines that often claim to be the one single ultimate truth?
That is the defining struggle for modern faith leaders. And what the sources show is that the interfaith movement very strategically uses this common ethical foundation as a starting point, as a platform for cooperation.
So they focus on the how and not the why.
Exactly. They recognize they have to focus on shared actions and ethical behavior, the golden rule, and for a time just set aside the deep, often exclusionary theological claims that have historically driven violence. It's sort of an agreement to act as ethical partners, even if they can't agree on the nature of God.
And that strategic focus is what's really driving the growth of this interfaith dialogue. So the shared ethical core is the motivation, and the movement itself is the organized response.
Right. It's designed to combat prejudice and build these channels for tolerant communication. And we're not just talking about small local gatherings here. This is global institutional diplomacy. Take the World's Parliament of Religions. They had a huge gathering in Chicago in 1993, a major event all about legitimizing respect and tolerance among global religious leaders.
And you see that same principle being applied at the local level too, right? Especially in really multicultural places. The sources point to the Scarborough Missions Interfaith Desk in Toronto as a great example.
They are boots on the ground. They're sponsoring symbolic acts of unity like sharing a meal together. And they focus on themes that cut across religions, like reconciliation, unity, and even environmental ecology. For them, religious pluralism, the existence of many different faiths, isn't an obstacle. It's an asset for global development.
But when we talk about this, there are some technical challenges. The dialogue is often framed by two concepts, right? Inclusivism and pluralism. What's the difference, and why is it such a big hurdle for these groups?
This really gets to the heart of the theological challenge. So inclusivism is let's say, the softer position. An inclusivist faith might recognize that there's truth or value in other religions. But ultimately, they still believe that their own path is the fullest or maybe the most complete way to salvation. Dialogue there is polite, but there's an implied hierarchy.
Okay, so it's like your path is good, but mine is better. And pluralism, which is the Scarborough position.
Pluralism is much more radical, theologically. It's the position that all major religions are equally valid, equally effective paths to whatever you consider the ultimate reality or truth. This demands that participants fully, 100%, accept the spiritual validity of the other person's faith. And the big challenge for the movement is bridging that gap, moving communities from that comfortable inclusivism to the much harder but more genuine pluralism.
That really makes organizations like the Scarborough Missions or that Sikh community in New Mexico the sources mention, it makes them powerful testing grounds. They're pushing past just being polite into something much deeper.
And at the exact same time, all of this is happening. As faith communities are wrestling with these ideas, there's this powerful parallel movement offering a completely secular moral structure, humanism.
Right, we have to connect humanism to this global ethical story. It's a philosophy that basically shifts the source of all value and meaning away from the spiritual or religious and places it squarely on humankind itself. It's all about human welfare and dignity based on reason.
And it has deep historical roots. It got a huge boost during the Renaissance with the rediscovery of Greek and Roman knowledge, but it was really solidified during the Enlightenment. The sources correctly point to Immanuel Kant, who argued back in the 18th century that moral law wasn't from some external religious command. It was rooted in the rational mind of every single person.
That is a fundamental shift, a total relocation of ethical authority. It means you don't need a divine command to be a good person.
And if you connect that Kantian idea to the bigger picture today, contemporary humanists are applying that same focus on reason to massive global problems. They look at human rights, racism, inequality, and use logic to see the moral imperative to solve them.
So how does that secular logic apply to something like environmentalism? The sources connect groups like Greenpeace to the humanist cause.
It's a direct ethical application. Humanism's core concern is human welfare and the destructive side of materialism. So when a modern humanist looks at climate change or ecological damage, they see a clear, rational threat to the future dignity and flourishing of humanity. Therefore, Reason dictates that defending the environment is a primary moral obligation, not for some spiritual reward, but because it ensures the survival and well-being of the human community.
So it provides this cohesive, non-theistic reason for global social responsibility, and it's operating completely parallel to the ethical mandates we see in the Golden Rule.
So you have all these forces: extremism pulling people apart, interfaith dialogue pulling them together, humanism offering this secular moral path. How do we track all these shifts in real time? Well, we use data.
Which brings us to demography, the study of population statistics. It is so essential in a world changing this fast. It lets us move beyond just stories and into, quantified reality.
And in a really diverse society like Canada, the census, which they take every 5 years, is an absolutely critical source of information. It gives you a factual snapshot of how society is actually organized and how it's changing.
So what specific data do they collect that lets researchers track religious engagement?
Well, the questionnaire is pretty detailed. It covers marital status, language, age, and, crucially, religion. But researchers want to know more than just what box people tick. They use the data to track the application of faith. Specifically, they're looking at the percentage of the population that attends religious services regularly.
And what does that engagement data tell us? What's the story there?
It tells us the pace of adaptation. The source notes that around 35% of Canadians attend religious services regularly. Now, that number is vital for both faith leaders and for policymakers because it shows the level of active institutional engagement.
So why does knowing that specific number, that 35%, matter so much? What are the real-world implications?
It forces strategic shifts. I mean, if two-thirds of the population are only nominally religious or completely secular, then governments and social planners have to figure out where those people are getting their social services, their moral guidance, their sense of community. It quantifies the speed of secularization, which means faith-based organizations either have to adapt their outreach or they risk losing relevance entirely to secular groups, including those driven by humanist ethics.
It gives us that factual basis, a way to understand how religious communities are changing and adapting in the new millennium.
So when you put it all together, what does it all mean? We've seen a world defined by this high-stakes tension, right? You have violent extremism, like the Taliban, versus this profound cooperative dialogue, like the Scarborough missions. And this is all happening while powerful non-theistic worldviews like humanism are growing. And demographers are literally measuring the shifts with census data.
The conflict is absolutely real. But that profound ethical unity, the thing embodied in the Golden Rule and echoed by humanist reason, it shows there's also this global trend toward communication and respect, even as the way people practice their faith is changing.
And that data point, that 35% regular attendance rate from the Canadian census, that's a huge indicator of shifting behavior, which it raises a really important final question.
If demographic data keeps showing this shift, this change in how often and where people practice their faith, how might that changing application of faith reshape the global priorities of the interfaith movement? Will the focus shift away from trying to solve these deep theological divides and move almost entirely to just practical, ethical cooperation on shared global challenges like ecology, leveraging that moral common ground found in both faith and reason? It's definitely something to mull over as you see the religious landscape continue to adapt.